Hey everyone, Pepsilk here, and I wanted to make a performance guide for Black Myth Wukong as I've heard some issues on the internet about people struggling to run Black Myth Wukong, and there's a few ways you can optimize this game, and I want to go over it today. No bullshit. I'll get straight to the point. So first thing you can do is drivers. So as of today, as of recording this video, actually, the driver update for Black Myth Wukong just came out. So if you want to try and get better performance with an easy installation or easy process, this is the first thing I would do. Download and install this driver, see if it improves your FPS at all. For me, I noticed a substantial change, but it's very subjective and it'll be dependent on which GPU you're running. So I would highly recommend to download your drivers first. Now we'll get into the in-game settings. In a nutshell, you got your apply recommended graphics settings, which you can use if you want, but typically they try to put your settings as like high or like very high, and you don't want that because you're going to lose a lot of frames. So what I would do is I'd try and edit them. First option you have here is super resolution. You've got ultra performance, performance, balance, quality, and DLAA. DLAA, I would highly recommend not going for, as it tells you the current settings exceed the recommended settings and may lead to performance issues. This is more or less for like frame generation and for 40 series RTX cards, so I would highly recommend to not do that. The best mode I would recommend is quality or balance. Now, the way that Game Science did this with this whole like numeric system that they have, I just wish it had, balance, quality, performance, ultra performance, and DLA like every other game does. But for some reason, they had to go numerical here. So best recommendation, whichever one you go to, just go to the highest value. You'll be fine with that. That's okay. If you use TSR or FSR, pretty much the same thing here. Just adjust it until it looks clear or enough that you would notice a performance. I would recommend to not go below like 50 or 25 because it can look very blurry for FSR and TSR, so just be very careful with that. But DLSS, definitely stick around the 70 or 60 range. If you have to go lower, go lower. Just know that your game will look a lot blurrier the lower you go. But 60 or 75 would be my recommendations. Frame generation enables frame generation technology. This is more specifically for GTX 40 series cards. I'm not exactly sure if AMD cards have frame generation. Apologies for you AMD users out there if you do watch this. But frame generation is not recommended. Or not recommended, sorry. It is recommended if you have a 40 series card. If not, you won't be able to use this. So just keep that at off. Full ray tracing, keep that off. Do not use this. While it does make the game look prettier, it's very intensive. Unless you have the best PC in the world and can use ray tracing and DLAA and frame generation with no problems, I would recommend not using ray tracing. In my opinion, I think ray tracing just puts too much stress on your computer, and even though it makes the game look cool, it's not needed. Detailed graphics. View distance quality. Adjust the rendering quality of distant objects. Choosing a high level increases the detail and density of distant objects. This doesn't have too much of an FPS dip, but I would recommend to keep it on either high or very high. If so, adjust it to low. Doesn't make too much of a performance difference, especially in Black Myth Wukong. It's just level of detail. If that's something that really annoys you, keep it on high. If not, and you want to go lower, feel free to just set it to medium or low. It's not too much of a substantial FPS difference, but you may notice something. Anti-aliasing quality, keep this on very high. Very minimalistic on every Unreal Engine game out there, 4 and 5. If this is an option, always put it on very high. Just the best way. Doesn't make too much of an FPS difference. Keep that on very high. Post effects quality, adjust the quality of post-processing filters, affecting effects such as depth of field, bloom, subsurface scattering, and ambient occlusion. I think this may be somewhat intensive, but from my experience, setting it to about high from very high didn't really net me that much of a FPS difference, so I would recommend to just keep this on high or medium. Probably the best way to go. Shadow quality, adjust the detail quality of shadows. Higher settings provide more precise shadow effects and increase shadow softness. Now, the game tells you here significantly impacts performance. Please adjust with caution. I can confirm that this does impact performance. So if you want maximum FPS, I would recommend setting this to low. Best way to ensure that you get a good experience. And the low shadows in game don't look as bad. It's like a little bit, I guess, jagged or not as clear, but it's not too much of an impact. For me, I always like to put my shadows on low regardless of what game it is, just because it's impactful in general. But low is definitely the best course here. If you want to go a little bit higher, I'd go medium. There'll be like a I guess 2 to 3, maybe 4 FPS difference, but keep it at low. Texture quality, same as anti-aliasing. Isn't too impactful. Simply just adjust texture quality to change the detail level of items, buildings, and characters. I would recommend to keep this at very high, simply because it's minimal FPS loss or gain, so you're not really losing anything. If you're very desperate though, just put it to low or medium, but very high is the best way to go here. Visual effect quality, next one that impacts performance. Adjust the level of detail and visual effects impacting atmospheric fog or volumetric fog, cloud density, and particle effects. Significantly impacts performance. Definitely lower this one down. This is a big one. This affects your FPS a lot. I'd recommend medium or high if you can handle it. If not, medium is fine. You don't notice too much of a visual difference. And the volumetric fog especially gets reduced to the point where it's not as impactful. And putting this on like very high will significantly increase your frames. So I'd recommend putting it anywhere between high and lower. Hair quality, adjust the level of detail for hair. Personally, haven't noticed this one. Kept it on high anyway because it looks cool. But I'm guessing it's something to do with physics, maybe? I didn't notice an impact on this one at all. But experiment. Maybe try low to see if it does help. Vegetation quality. Adjust the level of detail for vegetation. Keep that on high. You can put that to very high if you want to. I don't think it's as impactful. But since foliage is something to consider in these sorts of games, and foliage can be impactful for performance, Skyrim modding, I would recommend just keeping this on high. Global illumination quality. This is a big one. Adjust the global illumination quality. Choosing a high level can significantly enhance the lighting quality of scenes and characters. Now, this one is a big one. If you put this on high or very high, expect a loss of at least like 10 or 15 frames. Even 8 frames to just any. It is impactful enough to where you'll notice it. If you turn this very high and keep your overlay on, you'll notice the FPS decrease instantly. Now, personally, by putting this on low, it significantly boosts your frames. This is probably the FPS killer out of everything that I've seen and experimented with. This is the one that can kill your frames. So I would recommend just setting it to low. It may make the lighting look bad, but in reality, you're going to gain more FPS, especially if you're trying to push for 60. So I would recommend just setting this to low. In reflection quality, adjust the rendering quality of surface reflections and water reflections. Now, this isn't too bad. I think high is good enough. You could probably opt to put this higher, but I only opted to just set it to high because, like, reflections in games, I would argue, is more impactful than, especially in UE5, is more impactful than, say, anti-aliasing and texture quality. So, best to keep that on high. And this will be very dependent on what you get. And sorry, I'm really stuttering right now. Apologies. You should get a huge FPS boost from this. Maybe not too huge, but huge enough to where you'll be able to hit that 60 FPS cap or whatever FPS it is you're trying to go for. If you need to lower the settings, worst case, lower all the settings and just leave it at that. You're going to get a significant boost. Very high, I remember my benchmark was around, I think, 55 to 60. And then setting it to all low on my rig, I was able to get 100 FPS. So if that's what you want, this is coming from a 3080 with an AMD Ryzen 5 3600 CPU core, or CPU, sorry. So take that as you will. But if you have a higher end PC or better CPU than me, you're probably going to end up getting even more frames since this game is very CPU intensive. So yeah. Last thing to consider as well is your display settings. Now, if you're trying to go for 60, definitely cap your frame rate to 60. It's going to feel more consistent, and it won't stress your computer out as much. If you're trying to push for 120, you can as well, or you can just turn the frame rate cap off. But I would highly recommend to limit to either 120 or 60, because I feel like a lot of computers or a lot of players are going to be trying to go between 60 and 120. If you can push over that, I mean, props to you. But I would definitely recommend 60 or 120 frame rate cap. Obviously, display resolution, whatever res you're running. Borderless, I wish there was a full screen option. I hope that there's a mod or they add a full screen option. I'm quite shocked that there isn't one. And yeah, that's it. That's it for the graphical settings. And hopefully you'll notice some frame rate increases. Let me know in the comments how that tests. And lastly, I've got one more solution as more of like a alternative solution. You don't have to do it. But this is in regards to the frame generation I talked about before. So if you don't have a 40 series but want some form of frame generation, the best solution is Lossless Scaling. Now, Lossless Scaling is an all-in-one gaming utility for scaling and frame generation, and it has been a lifesaver for me with new games and more specifically older games, because older games get frame locked at like 30 or 60. So having a frame generator allows you to play those games at exceptionally high frame rates and makes them more fun and I guess smoother to play, right? And Lossless Scaling, don't mind my hours on record. I have a lot more. I just launch it from the EXE, so I don't show my hours on it. But I've used it a ton, and it is really good for just being able to generate frames without needing DLSS to do so. Now, the pricing of it is $10.25, at least for me in Australian dollars, it's $10.25. And it is really cheap. It's dirt cheap. And what you get is this. So you get this when you open it up if you do decide to buy it. And scaling type, you want to keep that to off. Don't bother using that because the game has in-game scaling, so there's no reason to use it. But frame generation, this is where the beauty comes in. So you've got two settings here, LSFG, 2.3 and 1.1. I highly recommend to keep it at 2.3. Also forgot to mention, keep this on auto, keep this to aspect ratio. Don't set it to full screen. Just because it'll feel smoother that way, trust me. You got a few options. You got performance, which you can play around with for less powerful GPUs. The game will look a little more ugly. So I try to steer away from that if you can. Cursor, that can stay the same. Sync mode, default. Max frame latency, keep that the same. Draw FPS so you can see how much FPS you're getting in-game when you use the application. Capture API, DXGI. Prefer GPU auto, output display to your monitor. And that's it. And once you do that, I won't do it now because every time for some reason I use scaling, it seems to like break my recordings. But when you get into the game, if you press Control S on the top left here, or just simply scale, Control S is probably the better way to do it when you're in an application. You will notice a FPS counter here. So it'll say 60 or whatever FPS you're capping to on the left, and on the right is your expected frame rate. And another thing to do before you do all that is you make sure you cap your frame rate to 60, or if you want to go higher and you can get 120, you can cap to 120, but it is recommended to cap your frame rate at a frame rate that is consistent and is able to be constantly hit. Because if you try to cap at a number that your computer cannot hit, you'll get input delay you'll get input delay across the board. The game won't be as smooth and it'll run and feel like shit. So once you get all that in game, you won't be able to see it from the video, but in game you should notice that your game will feel a lot smoother. And that's the beauty of frame generation, man. It just helps your game to feel smoother. The best thing about this is, even though it's paid, you get frame generation without needing a 40 series card, and this can work on a bunch of GPUs. It pretty much works on everything. So yeah, it's just something that I would recommend. I've been using it myself to try and get my frame rate to 120 because I can't I can't hit 120 frames, but I can hit a consistent 60. So I've been using frame generation to do that for me. And, you know, it's been really good. I have nothing bad to say about it. The only problem I would say with lossless scaling is just artifacting. Artifacting is something where objects or things in the environment can look a bit faded out or like black to where you can notice it immediately. But given that Black Myth Wukong is a third-person game, and with the camera perspective, you're not going to notice it unless you take the time to zoom in and use your eyes, your X-ray vision eyes, to take in the artifacts. Because I haven't been able to notice it myself. So it's been pretty good so far, and I would highly recommend lossless scaling as an alternative option if the other two options aren't enough to get the frame rate that you want. So yeah, that's my performance guide. I hope that helps. I hope that helps people. This is the first time of like me doing this. So if I'm too fast or if there's any feedback you can give me, please give me something, because I'd like to make more of these in the future for newer games if that is possible. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Take care, and I'll have more coming to you soon. Peace.